Humans? Shathra scoffed. They're garbage collectors. What are they going to do? She glowered down at her monitor. The security sensors showed a human in a radiation suit. He was in the central reaction chamber of her ship. He was wielding a vacuum cleaner.
I don't know,
Grundy admitted. He ran a large hand over his scalp.
I'm just passing along what they said.
The two of them were in the captain's ready room. Captain Shathrao Vandi was not the most highly decorated officer in the Dassarai Armada, nor was she the most experienced. She was, however, one of the most competent. The fact that she was sitting in dry dock was proof of that. The Battle of Raxus Prime had left very few survivors. It was a female, right? Shathra's lips quirked. Maybe she was flirting. Commander Grundy was average-looking at best, exactly 2 meters tall, with a thick chest, a lantern jaw, and dark, soulful eyes. His arms and legs rippled with muscle, and his blue skin was smooth and flawless. Instead of the messy hair of the humans, the top of his head held an intricate pattern of tattoos. By Shathra's standards, he didn't look like much, but she'd never met a human who didn't drool at the sight of a Dassarai.
I thought so too, said Grundy, but then a male said the same thing. Told me to pass it up the chain of command.
Shathra watched the human vacuum. Shathra couldn't make out the figure's form through the heavy radiation suit, but something about the worker's plodding steps told her it was a male. He moved slowly, clumsily, occasionally fumbling at the controls of his vacuum cleaner or the tank strapped to his back. How very odd, Shathra remarked. The captain liked humans. They were a helpful, friendly species, lively and much more variable than Shathra's people. The humans had not indulged in genetic perfection as the Dassarai had. They came in all shapes and sizes and colors, each distinct and unique in a way Shathra found endearing. She'd even dated a few of the garbage men in her youth. Most Dassarai had. Still, they weren't an impressive species. Shathra couldn't imagine how they thought they could turn the tide.
Humans are like that, Grundy shrugged. They're not advanced, but they are very loyal. It wouldn't surprise me if they're mustering every ship they can scrounge to come to our aid. It's sweet of them, but... He shook his head. I'd rather they stayed out of the line of fire.
I know. Shathra watched the human exit the engine compartment. He removed a full tank and handed it off to another human in a radiation suit. Shathra debated trying to find him once his shift was over. Human males weren't particularly handsome, but they were attentive and eager to please. Shathra could really use that right now. I don't think we'll be able to protect them this time.
I don't think we can protect us, Grundy agreed. Feeble as they might be, we're going to need all the help we can get. He grimaced. Doesn't mean I have to like it. The human strapped an empty tank to himself. He walked back into the compartment and fired up his vacuum. I'm not sure I'd call them feeble, Shathra told him. There's a reason we let the humans handle waste disposal. The average human wasn't as fast or as strong or as smart as a Dassarai, but they were much more resilient. They could heal from wounds that would kill Shathra. Their bodies were so adaptive that they could improve their abilities through trauma, and their cellular structure could withstand and even build a resistance to moderate amounts of radiation. This last trait was the one that had led to their specialization in waste disposal. The engine room of a starship was a lethal place for most species. Captain Shathra's ship was powered by an antimatter reactor. It provided exponentially more energy than fusion or fission, but it came with a similar increase in ionizing radiation. The reactor was quiet at the moment, but some of that radiation still lingered. Proper gear could protect against most of it, but the annihilation effect of antimatter reactions created a plethora of exotic particles that would go right through a radiation suit. Neutrinos and antineutrinos, rogue quarks and positrons, and exotic hadrons of every flavor. Most of the particles small enough to bypass a radiation suit had a half-life measured in seconds, but more would be released with every stirring of the dust. Dust was the residue left behind when matter and antimatter collide.
The annihilation effect didn't destroy material so much as it released the energies binding them together. What remained was subatomic and completely inert. The dust itself was harmless, but it tended to trap the rogue hadrons released by the antimatter collision. Moving the dust in any way caused exposure to a vast array of subatomic radiation. The humans were one of the few species capable of shrugging it off. It was a good thing, too. Before the humans stepped in, the Dassarai had had to rely on automation and depressurization to clean the dust out of their engines. Drones and machinery didn't survive that duty for long. That's why there was a single human with a vacuum, pulling dust out of Shathra's precious engine compartment.
"No, feeble's the word," said Grundy. "You've seen the ships they use. They're barely shielded, and those kinetics they use couldn't even scratch a proper warship. If their entire species bands together and throws everything they've got at the enemy, they'll be worth maybe as much as one of our long-range patrols."
"They're more advanced than you give them credit for," said Shathra.
"Are they?"
Grondo raised an eyebrow. He pointed at the view screen.
"That one's using a literal vacuum cleaner."
"No, he isn't,"
Shathra denied.
"Yes, he is. Look at it."
Grundy crossed his arms.
"My mom had one just like it."
Shathra turned in surprise.
"Your mom used—"
"She liked the sound it makes,"
Grundy explained.
"and she never did trust cleaning droids."
His face fell.
"She was always an old lady."
"Was?"
"She was on Raxus Prime."
His jaw clenched, eyes distant.
"She got the evacuation order, but—"
He let out a slow breath through his nose.
"It was too late. There wasn't time."
"Oh, Void."
Shathra put a hand on the man's shoulder.
"I'm sorry, Grundy."
"I don't want your sympathy."
The man's voice cracked, then firmed back up.
"I want revenge. When are we going back out there?"
"As soon as repairs are complete,"
she assured him.
3 days at most."
Grundy's face hardened.
"Good."
They were silent for a moment. Shathra watched her second-in-command struggling to control his expression. He needed a distraction.
"That's not a vacuum cleaner, you know."
Grundy's eyes flicked to the view screen.
"It looks like one to me."
"It looks like one, but it isn't."
Shathra tried to remember what the garbage men had told her.
"Do you think airflow is enough to pick up subatomic particles? An oxygen molecule's a lot bigger than the dust."
"I guess it would be, wouldn't it?"
Grundy frowned.
"So how's he picking up the dust?"
"Focused gravity, I think."
Shathra shrugged.
"A human explained it once, but I couldn't really follow most of it. The tank he's using isn't as simple as it looks either. It has to contain hadrons that are small enough to slip between or even inside atoms, and the inert nature of dust makes it immune to boson forces and electromagnetism."
"Huh."
Grundy scratched his scalp.
"How's that work?"
"No idea."
Shathra admitted.
"But it's not technology we gave them. We actually used airflow ourselves before the humans took over. It was slow and messy, and didn't work very well. We'd have to shut down gravity and repeatedly shunt all our air into space, and we'd still have dust everywhere for months after every cleaning."
Grundy grunted.
"Okay, so they're technological masters in the art of picking up trash. That doesn't make their ships any more dangerous."
"I suppose not."
Shathra frowned.
"I guess not every species is made for war."
"Maybe not,"
said Grundy. He clenched a fist.
"But we are. The Implacs think they've got our backs against the wall. We've got to get out there and teach them differently."
"We will,"
Shathra lied. She'd seen the reports. She'd fought the Implacs herself, same as Grundy. Their ships were as far above hers as hers was above the humans. The Dassarai would fight to the last, but they were doomed. Shathra knew that, and so did Grundy. But it wasn't what he needed to hear.
3 days and we'll take it to them."
3 days later, Captain Shathra stood on the bridge. Her ship, the Clarity of Purpose, was a Sterling-class battlecruiser. It was the most common class of ship in the Armada. long and lean, composed of 3 curving triangular hulls attached to a central sphere. The Clarity was in rough shape. Large sections of her hull were still missing. The repairs had been hurried, and more than a little slapdash. Shathra wasn't entirely certain the ship would stay functional for long.
"All systems blue, Captain,"
Lieutenant Janos reported. Janos looked and sounded so much like Commander Grundy that Shathra had to rely on their head tattoos to tell them apart. It was one of the downsides of genetic perfection.
"Starbase Vilga has cleared us for departure."
"Copy," said the captain. "Take us out, Mr. Janos."
"Aye, sir."
The lieutenant put his hands on flight control. The Clarity of Purpose hummed. Captain Shathra moved her gaze across the bridge. The bridge consisted of a semicircular space facing a large central view screen. Dozens of console stations were arranged in orderly semicircular rows leading up to the command dais. Or at least they had been. An area that took up a third of the bridge was nothing but empty floor. Not only was the bridge missing a third of its combat stations, but the ones nearest the blank space were too smashed or melted to be used. Shathra would have liked replacements, but there were none to be had. She supposed she should be grateful the repair crews had fixed the holes at least, even if all they'd really done was slap some sheet metal on the ceiling and the deck. The command dais was just a bit of raised floor with 3 chairs on it. Each chair had several modular screens and consoles attached. Captain Shathra sat in the middle chair. Commander Grundy sat to her right. The chair to her left was empty. The lieutenant commander had not survived Draxus Prime. Lieutenant Janos was next in line for promotion, but Shathra needed him in navigation. He was the best pilot they had left. The mood on the bridge was grim. Shathra's officers carried on their duties with professionalism and competence, spines rigid and shoulders clenched. The crew of a Dassarai war vessel was as disciplined and competent as a group of sapients could be, but they were still people. People who knew they were going to die. Captain Shathra wanted to reassure them, to lie if she had to. It would not work. Her officers had the experience and the intelligence to know the odds were against them. The Implacs were stronger, more advanced and more numerous. The Dassarai would fight with brilliance and valor. They would still die. Their people would die. Their allies would die. Her officers were not doing their duty out of hope, or honor, or even spite. They were doing their duty because there was nothing else they could do. The Clarity of Purpose cleared dry dock. Captain Shathra took a breath. It was time to speak to the crew. She'd spent 3 days preparing for this, but none of the dozens of speeches she'd written felt good enough. She would have to do what she always did when plans failed. Improvise.
"Ensign Glear," she ordered. "Open a ship-wide channel."
"Aye, aye, sir."
Glear typed into his console. "Channel is open." Captain Shathra nodded in acknowledgement. She closed her eyes. She opened them again.
"This is the captain speaking. I have good news and bad news. The good news is reinforcements have finally arrived. The Jakai, Sevi, and Talakians have all mobilized, and their fleets are convening at Dassarai Prime. We are on our way to join them, along with every armada ship we can muster. The humans aren't ready yet, but I have been assured they are on their way as well."
Her lips quirked.
"I have it on good authority that they are building a trash catapult."
The brief chuckle of the bridge crew lifted the captain's spirits. She continued.
"That's the good news. The bad news is that we are still outnumbered and outgunned. The Implacs have won every battle. They've pushed us back again and again, and now there is nowhere left to run. Dassarai Prime is the last of our worlds. The Implacs have destroyed the rest. In 2 days' time, their fleet will arrive. This will be our final stand. If we don't win, the Implacs will kill every last Dassarai. We will die, and the League of Worlds will die with us. The Dassarai ascendancy is the strong arm of the League. We are their shield and their spear. We are the best and the strongest. That is why the Implacs attacked us first."
Captain Shathra's jaw clenched.
I will not lie to you. Our chances are small. This will likely be our final stand.
She searched the faces of the officers she could see. Some were stoic, some were tense, some, like Grundy, smothered with cold fury.
It doesn't matter,
she told them, voice firm.
We are Desserai. We will fight, not just for ourselves, but for everyone we have sworn to protect. We will face the Implacs with fury in our hearts and a song on our lips. If they are capable of learning fear, we will be the ones to teach them.
Shathra snarled, raising a fist.
We are Desserai. We will die as warriors. When death comes, it will find us laughing with our hands around its throat. We will strike the enemy, and we won't stop until the Implacs are destroyed, or every one of us breathes our last.
She raised her fist higher, voice rising with fury.
We are Desserai! We are the light that blinds! We are the shield that shelters! We are the spear that pierces the void!
19 officers thundered back.
We are the spear that pierces the void!
The voices of 203 other Desserai could be heard echoing through the corridors of Shathra's ship. Captain Shathra searched the faces of her officers. She liked what she saw. They were grim, yes, but they had purpose. They had resolve. It was enough.
Lieutenant Janos,
Captain Shathra gave the command.
Set a course for Desserai Prime and engage. Maximum fold.
It took the clarity of purpose a full 41 hours to reach Desserai Prime. Janos had pushed the fold drive as hard as he dared, and Captain Shathra had worried constantly that the battered engines would fall apart under the strain. Still, they made it. Shathra would have a full 2 hours to get her ship into position before the Implacs arrived. The Desserai Armada was a shadow of its former self, a mere 30,000 ships, less than a tenth of its original number. They floated in formation, forming the center of the defense fleet. Above them floated the ships of the Jikai. They were diamond-shaped and decorated with glyphs of glowing light. There were 94,000 of them. On either side of the Desserai were the Sevi. Sevi ships were graceful and elegant. Their shape reminded Shathra of a ribbon in the wind. Sevi ships were fast, but lightly shielded, and they had less than a tenth of the firepower the Clarity could bring to bear. There were 200,000 of them, but they were the weakest ships in the defense fleet. Below the Desserai were the Talokians. Big and bulky, the Talokian ships were 3 times the size of the Clarity of Purpose. Their shielding was almost as strong as a Desserai battlecruiser's, and they had roughly 2/3 the firepower. The problem was that they were slow, unwieldy. They would be easy targets for the Implacs, and there were only 50,000 of them. Captain Shathra checked in with High Admiral Ralta. The news was not good. Every ship that could be fielded was in position. There would be no reinforcements. Well, almost no reinforcements. The humans would arrive roughly 2 hours after the Implacs. They had only been able to send 20,000 ships. They might as well not have bothered. The next 2 hours were a frenzy of activity. Ordnance checks, battle plans, and whatever last-minute repairs the Clarity's maintenance crew could manage in the short time they had. The Clarity of Purpose took her place near the middle of the Desserai formation. Captain Shathra was grateful for the activity. There were few things more stressful than the wait before combat, and the wait was much worse when there was nothing to do.
Captain,
Lieutenant Janus reported.
Fold signatures are entering the system. They're here.
How many?
Shathra asked.
892,402.
The lieutenant's voice was steady, but his face was pale.
Understood,
she told him.
Ensign clear? Give me a shipwide channel, if you please.
Aye, Captain. The ensign was pale as well.
Attention all hands,
Shathra intoned.
This is the captain speaking. The enemy is here. Battle stations. Prepare for combat maneuvers.
She paused. What to say? Captain Shathra took a steadying breath.
I want you to know, You are the finest crew I have ever served with. It has been an honor and a privilege."
Commander Grundy met her gaze and gave a grim nod. Her officers looked scared. Who wouldn't? But they were ready. Their resolve was still intact.
"Now let's go to war with a song on our lips. One last song. One last fight. One last time."
She nodded at Greer. She closed the channel. Folded space resolved into the vessels of the Implax. Their ships were as monstrous as the species itself. Roughly spherical, dark hulls shot through with veins of malevolent green light. A multitude of spines stretched from the back of the ships, curling forward like the raised tails of a stinging insect. One of the ships sent a broadcast on all frequencies.
"We are the Implax. You are unworthy. Your filth will be cleansed in fire. Your ashes will pave the way for the pure. You will not be remembered."
High Admiral Ralta opened a channel in return, as did every ship of the Desserai. She spoke with defiance.
"We are the light that blinds."
Shathra and her crew echoed the phrase. The crew of every Desserai ship spoke with them.
"We are the light that blinds."
The High Admiral continued.
"We are the shield that shelters."
"We are the shield that shelters."
Hundreds of thousands of Desserai repeated.
"We are the spear that pierces the void."
"We are the spear that pierces the void,"
the Desserai thundered.
"Forward!"
ordered the High Admiral.
"All ships engage!"
The armada surged forward. Cannons blazed and missiles launched. The supporting fleets lurched into motion a moment later, adding their fire to the fray. It was more a gesture of defiance than a tactical maneuver. The Implax were still 200,000 kilometers away. At that distance, evading weapons fire was trivial, and there was plenty of time to shoot down any missiles. Still, it felt good. High Admiral Ralta lifted her voice in song. The crew of the Clarity of Purpose knew it immediately. The Psalm of Finality. Martial and mournful and proud. It was the song the Desserai sang when death was inevitable. Shathra and her officers sang with the High Admiral. So did the crews of 30,000 Desserai warships. Countless voices melded together with perfect timing and perfect pitch, a benefit of genetic perfection. Shathra's heart swelled with pride and sadness as their voices reverberated through the void. The song finished. The High Admiral closed the comms. The Desserai formation split. It took 3 battle cruisers to match a single Implax ship, so the armada broke into teams of 4. It was a losing strategy, Shathra knew. The goal wasn't to win. The High Admiral simply wished to kill as many Implax as possible before they were overwhelmed. As the two forces closed in on each other, shots started to land. The Desserai were the first to take damage. The Implax were faster, more agile, and had better guns. Lieutenant Janus narrowly evaded bright lances of anti-plasma, ion beams, and coil gun slugs. He was one of the few pilots able to do so. The Clarity's sister ships flared as their shields repelled the attacks. No damage to the ships themselves, but that wouldn't last. It took 20 minutes to reach optimal combat range. The opposing fleets decelerated, maneuvering around each other, trying to find just the right distance to land their shots. For the Desserai, that distance was 2,300 kilometers. For the Implax, it was 2,600. The Clarity of Purpose danced on a knife edge, weaving in and out of range as her cannons blazed. Her 3 sister ships danced around her, the less skilled pilots taking the brunt of the hits. The engagement with a single Implax took several minutes. Focused fire from 4 battle cruisers whittled the enemy down, but its guns hammered at the Desserai in turn. By the time it was destroyed, 2 of the Clarity's sister ships had less than a tenth of their shielding left. Their captains did not care. The quartet chose another target and opened fire. The next fight was bitter and costly. The lone Implax destroyed all 3 of the Clarity's fellows. Shathra was forced to flee. The Implax followed, but was ambushed by a swarm of Sevi. The swift ships added their fire to Shathra's, destroying the vessel with no further loss. Shathra looked for another strike group to join, but found none. They were the only surviving Desserai cruiser within 12,000 kilometers. She ordered the Clarity to join a group of Talokian destroyers instead. The Talokians were being pounded by a trio of Implax ships. Captain Shathra calmed them and talked them into focusing their fire on one Implax at a time. With the Clarity's help, they destroyed all 3 Implax, but 8 of the 12 Talokians were lost. And so it went. Over the next hour, the Clarity of Purpose flitted from one skirmish to another, always joining the largest group of ships she could find. A mixture of luck and skilled piloting kept Shathra alive much longer than she'd expected, and she assisted in killing 8 more Implax ships. It wasn't enough. Not nearly. The Clarity was surviving, but the others were dying all around her. There had been 380,000 ships at the start of the fight. Only 100,000 were left. 10 minutes later, Shathra's luck ran out. A trio of Implax cruisers swept in, obliterating the swarm of Sevi ships the Clarity had been supporting. Shathra found herself facing 4 Implax alone. She ordered a retreat, tried to lead them to the nearest group of defenders. There was no one close enough to help.
"Shields down," Tactical reported. "Minor damage to—"
The Clarity rocked. The lights flickered out. Captain Shathra groped in the dark, gripping a console as her movement floated her out of her chair. Oh, void. No power. Shathra's fingers clutched painfully at her useless controls. It couldn't be over. Not yet. The lights came back on. Gravity did not return. "Damage report," Shathra ordered. Janos was already typing into a console.
"Our main reactor's out. Weapons, shield, and engines are offline. Decks A2 through A8 are... They're gone, sir. Hull breaches on decks C1 through C9.
He swallowed.
"The breaches are sealed, but we've lost a lot of air. Life support is down. We've got about 40 minutes, sir. Maybe an hour, if we don't breathe too much."
Understood.
Captain Shathra took a breath. This was it. She was going to die. That was okay. She'd known she would. Her face hardened. 40 minutes. She still had 40 minutes to make a difference.
"Sensors?"
"They're a little spotty, sir," said Janos. "We're missing a lot of the arrays, but we can still sort of see what's happening."
"Good."
Captain Shathra pulled up a sensor feed on her console.
"Tell damage control to get our weapons back up."
"Sir," Commander Grundy spoke up, "with only one generator, we're not going to be able to power any cannons or beam weapons."
Shathra gave him a sharp look. He met her gaze calmly.
"We'll have to use missiles, Captain."
Shathra nodded.
"Tactical, how many missiles do we have left?"
The tactical officer, Lieutenant Eula, started. She typed into her console for a moment, then said,
"We have 20 left, but the launchers in A and C sections have been destroyed. The 6 in B section are the only ones we can fire."
"Understood." 6 missiles. Captain Shathra peered at the sensor display. The 4 Implax that had killed her ship were on an intercept course for a small fleet of Sevi. 24 of the little ships were fleeing a trio of the enemy. They were just fast enough to keep ahead, but that would end when the other 4 Implax cut them off. She used her console to highlight the 4 interceptors.
"Tactical, fire all remaining missiles at these targets."
Lieutenant Eula didn't question.
"Aye, sir. Missiles away."
Shathra watched. The missiles streaked towards the Implax. They did not reach their targets. The enemy shot them down. That was fine. 6 missiles wouldn't have done much anyway. The attack accomplished what Shathra had hoped. The 4 Implax broke off their intercept course. They turned around and came back to finish off the Clarity. Shathra let out a small sigh. It was the end now. She'd done all she could. She held herself in place above her chair, back straight and chin raised. She did her best to radiate calm acceptance and pride. Her officers deserved no less.
"Captain," Janos reported, "full signatures detected. 22,000 ships. I think it's the humans."
It was too little, too late.
"Understood, Lieutenant."
She met the man's eyes.
"You did good work today."
The lieutenant swelled with pride.
Thank you, sir. It's been an honor. Shathra!
Commander Grundy's startlement snapped the captain's gaze to him. His eyes were wide.
I mean, Captain, the Implax ships, they're... Look!
Shathra looked at her sensor console. The Implax that were coming for her were still en route, but they were in pieces. Something had sliced the ships into thirds. The edges of the cuts glowed.
What the void?
Shathra didn't understand. She panned the display out. Implax ships everywhere were falling apart. She couldn't see why.
It's the humans, sir.
Commander Grundy was grinning.
It has to be.
We're receiving a transmission from the humans, sir, Ensign Greer reported.
Patch it through,
Shathra ordered. The voice was deep and gruff.
Attention, all League vessels. This is Admiral Orozco of the Terran Defense Force. I'm sorry we're late. We'll take it from here. Please disengage and save who you can. We'll cover you.
Shathra went back to the sensor screen. Everywhere she looked, Implax ships were being sliced to pieces. How were the humans doing it? Their ships were still 12,000 kilometers away. She focused on one of the human ships. It was small, barely 150 meters in length. It had a boxy, rectangular design. Its shields were light, and the only weapons she saw were a pair of ion beams and half a dozen coil guns. There was an odd reading. 4 devices were cycling a massive amount of power. What were they? Shathra decided it didn't matter. The garbage men were slaughtering the Implax. Her people were saved. The human fleet changed course, keeping a range of 10,000 kilometers as they systematically dismantled the Implax horde. The enemy turned, focusing frantically on the sudden threat. It wouldn't save them. The humans were out of range, and their invisible weapons couldn't be dodged. Shathra guessed the lost Implax would be dead within the hour. Not that she'd live to see it.
More fold signatures incoming, sir.
Greer spoke up.
60,000. Looks like more humans.
Shathra blinked at her sensors. The new ships were not military. They were garbage scows, the same waste management vessels she'd been seeing all her life. What were they doing here? The question was answered when one of the scows changed course. It was heading for the Clarity of Purpose. It hailed them.
Open a channel,
Shathra ordered. Clarity of Purpose, a human male spoke. Shathra realized with a start that it was the same human who'd cleaned her engine room 5 days ago. This is Captain John Harper of the Clean Sweep. I see your life support is down. I'm requesting permission to dock so we can evacuate your crew.
Permission granted, John.
Captain Shathra grinned in spite of herself. The survival of her people would have been enough, but now Shathra and her crew would live too.
You don't know how happy I am to see you.
The feeling's mutual, ma'am. She could hear John's grin. Let's get your people safe, then we'll talk. 20 glorious minutes later, Shathra was in John's quarters. It was a small space, but cozy. She sat at a small round table near the human's bunk. He sat across from her, pouring her a glass of orange juice. I'd have preferred beer, the human admitted, but I think we're both still on duty.
That we are,
Shathra agreed. She gave him one more smile before turning serious.
I have questions.
Ask away, said the human.
What the void just happened?
Shathra leaned forward.
How did your fleet destroy the Implax? What was the weapon that you used?
She frowned.
And why are you here?
Let me see. John met her gaze. In the order you asked, we won. We used dust guns. And I followed the defense force so I could help with rescue operations. He sipped his juice. Next question? Captain Shathra glowered. The human gave her a sly grin. Shathra's glower crumpled as an answering smile crept across her face. She forced the smile down and glowered harder.
What's a dust gun?
A little project the military's been working on, John explained. You know the strange matter your reactor produces? The dust? Shathra nodded. Well, it's got some crazy properties, and we've got some crazy engineers. Some egghead figured out that inert subatomic particles don't interact with shields. Like, at all. Shathra stared at the man.
Your species built a gun out of our waste products?
Basically, the man shrugged. The dust gun fires a stream of dust about half a micron wide. It's accelerated to a velocity about 1,000th of light speed. Ignores shields, and it'll cut at the atomic level. He shook his head. It's not our only ace in the hole, but it was the one we could field in the time we had.
Ace in the hole?
Shathra didn't know the term. Humans, John hesitated. We're not what you think. You see us as friendly primitives, and we worked hard to keep it that way. But that's not all we are. We just didn't want to scare you. He grimaced. Not after what happened with the Durians.
The Durians?
Shathra had never heard of them. The human waved away the question. Doesn't matter. The point is we've been keeping a low profile. The Jakai were so nice when we met them, and after we met you, he smiled ruefully. Well, we figured we could put the past behind us, just be friendly garbage men for a while. He shook his head. If we hadn't got so complacent, we could have acted sooner, saved more of you. I'm sorry.
Sorry?
Now it was Shathra's turn to shake her head.
You saved my life, John. You saved my crew. Your people saved the League of Worlds.
She reached out and cupped his cheek.
You have nothing to be sorry for.
It's kind of you to say so, said John. His eyes were still troubled. Shathra stared at the man. His species was sadder and much more dangerous than she'd always believed. They had developed a superweapon out of waste products. The thought was so inane she couldn't help but giggle. John frowned. What's so funny? The look on his face made Shathra laugh harder. What? John demanded.
You made trash catapults,
the Dassarai managed to get out. John blinked. I guess so?
Trash catapults!
Tears leaked out of Shathra's eyes. Joy and mirth and grief swirled together with the relief she was already feeling.
Grandi said you were making them, but I didn't.
She was laughing too hard. She tried to catch her breath.
I didn't believe him.
It's not that funny, the human objected.
You saved us with garbage,
she told him. It was ridiculous. It was beautiful. The laughter morphed into tears. She grabbed the man and pulled him close.
You saved us with...
The tears came faster.
You saved us.
Shathra cried. The human held her. He stroked her scalp and whispered comfort as months of fear and loss and despair leaked out of her. Shathra didn't know how long she cried. When she finally pulled away, she felt better. Better, but not well. There was still a great deal of grieving to do, and songs of mourning yet to be sung. Shathra could scarcely believe she'd lived to sing them.
Thank you,
she told him. Any time, said John, his brow furrowed. What we did, I hope it doesn't change too much. I'm sorry we hid what we are.
Hid what you are?
Shathra snorted. The humans didn't want to be dangerous. They didn't want her to be afraid. Treating them as if they weren't was the least she could do.
What are you talking about? You're garbage collectors. You came to our aid with industrial waste.
She wrapped her arms around the human.
It's all right, John. We already knew you humans liked to play with trash. We love you anyway.
That's not, John protested.
Shush.
Shathra silenced him.
Humans collect garbage, and that's the end of it.
She kissed him on the cheek.
You are garbage men, and we love you. That is all.